Worship team, we appreciate you guys. Our children and children's team, if you would like to, you are free to go downstairs and join the children's ministries. We appreciate all you do. And if you are joining us up here and staying with us, open up your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 4. You're also welcome to follow along. We have a church app that you're welcome to follow along in. And you can also just look on the screens, and we'll have verses and things posted there as well. What a tremendous week this has been. We had a good time. We had some, as you guys know, many of you know that we've had a food pantry going where we're helping to bless the community and love the community. It's important that the church not be inward focused, but begin to look on how we love and impact the community. And I didn't even have a chance to talk to Debbie this week, but I got a phone call from one of our visitors, one of our families, and they had a pretty amazing question, and they said, "What must I do to be saved?" And what a tremendous thing. I tell you, that's about the easiest conversation a guy can ask for right there. And what a privilege it is. Church, this is what church is about, though. It's not about those of us that, and it's great that we get to worship and come together and worship God, but it's also about loving the lost and sharing the gospel with the world around us. What a tremendous opportunity that we have to do those kinds of things. And so it's a blessing and a privilege. This morning we're going to be continuing this series in Nehemiah. And I began thinking about a trip that I took with my family quite a long time ago. My parents made a decision that they wanted to do one big family trip. And so they let my brother know and let my wife and I know, and they set a certain timetable, and they said, "Listen, we will pay for everything once you get there. You guys save money to get there, but we want to take you guys to Hawaii." And my wife and I are poor and said, "This may be our only chance to go." So we're in. So we saved and we got there. But I remember this moment. We're on the beach, and my nephews are there. And I have this youngest nephew, and he wanted to build a sandcastle. And tide is starting to come in, and I'm telling him, you don't want to build it there because it's going to be gone pretty quickly. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this with your own kids or family members, when they look at you like you're the dumbest person on the planet and that you don't have any clue what you're talking about. And he looked at me, and I kid you not, he rolled his eyes at me. Luckily for him, he's about the cutest kid that ever walked the earth, or else he would have been backhanded right into the ocean. Adorable kid. But he was, "Nope, I'm going to build it right here." And I still remember, as the waves got closer and closer, this panic he had. Because he had built the perfect sandcastle. He had this elaborate plan. He had all of these like columns and walls and all of these things here, and he was so proud of it. And I still remember the look on his face when the first wave came in and took half of it out. And this look of shock. And then I watched him for about a 10-minute window for this futile thing that he did. It was kind of a waste of time, but I understand what he was doing. He was trying to save all his hard work. So he began to scramble. Every time the water would come in, destroy whatever it did, he would try and rebuild it really fast. And then another wave would come and take out exactly what he had just fixed. And then he did it again. And I'm watching to see how long this is going to take, and he just kept going and going. And finally, the final wave came that took out the entire thing. And he sat there in the middle of what used to be his crowning achievement sandcastle and cried. Probably some of us can relate to that in our own lives. That you're fighting the tide all the time. And the waves of this life are just crashing against you. And there are times you feel like you are fighting a losing battle. In this moment, we gave him his moments, and my nephew was really upset. And again, he really is a cute kid, and it was like, okay, are you ready to listen now? Yes, with big old crocodile tears. Okay, let's move it much further back, and let's build it again. And then we began to build again. And much better experience that second time for him. But he learned this very valuable lesson in this. One was maybe you should listen. And the other thing was there are times you need help in the midst of life feeling like it's crumbling. See, this is what's happening in this Bible text that we're going to look at. There is a people in Jerusalem, the people of Israel, God's chosen people, that were brought to this land, and they were given this instruction that said, serve God, love God, live for God. Do not chase after the gods of the other nations, but live for me. And if you do this, you will stay in the land, and I will bless you. But if you reject it, you will go into exile. You will be rejected by God. And really what that is they rejected God, not that God rejected them. And this is the story of Israel. And so they're in the promised land, and what they do is the same thing they always do. And that is they decide they want to look just like the other nations around them. So they begin to intermarry with people that they shouldn't have been. They begin to live and behave in a way that they shouldn't live and behave, and they begin to worship gods that they were not supposed to ever be worshiping. And the end result of this was that God judged them and said, listen, I warned you, I told you, but for your own good, we're going to put you in exile so that I can bring you back and change your hearts. And so this people were conquered by the king of Babylon at the time, which is Nebuchadnezzar. And so he goes in and destroys all of Jerusalem, tears down the walls, pulls out all the temple and burns it, and just has this moment of just utter destruction. And the people are taken into captivity. And I want you to picture this, because there's a group of people taken into captivity. They took the best, the brightest, the ones that were like business owners, ones that were warriors, ones that were the intellects. And then they looked at the rest and said, no, we don't want them, and left them behind. Can you imagine if you were in that group? I mean, think about that. Not only did you disobey God, and now we're experiencing this challenge, but now you're looking at it, you're like, and I'm not even good enough to be a slave. I'm not even worth being taken. And they're left behind in the rubble. And for 70 years, the people of Israel are in captivity. And for 70 years, this generation is left behind in ruins and expected to make a life out of destroyed walls, no longer a temple. God has left them, and they have no hope. And this is where we come to the story of Nehemiah. So in the story of Nehemiah, we have Ezra that goes before him, Zerubbabel that goes before him. These three men go, and they begin restoring Israel and Jerusalem kind of a step at a time. The first guy goes in and helps rebuild the temple. Ezra comes in and reestablishes the Torah or the law. This is Old Testament writings like Moses, what he wrote. And he helps the people get back to worshiping God. And then Nehemiah comes in to assist in rebuilding the walls and helping to rebuild lives. And this is where we find ourselves. So Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1. We're going to take a look at this together. At this point, Nehemiah has returned. He has assessed the damage firsthand. He has got a plan. He's shared with the people the plan, and he's experiencing pushback from the community around him that are angry that God is trying to restore this people. And then in chapter 3, this amazing thing happens. The people get to work. And I love this part of the story because in chapter 3, every person there gets to work. They're given a piece of the wall, and this family goes here, this family goes there, and get going. If you are here this morning and you are part of the family of God, there is a place for you to serve and to work in His kingdom. And we see this even in Nehemiah chapter 3. And then we get to 4 here. Look at verse 1 with me. Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day, or just by offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap, and charred ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was standing beside him, remarked, "That stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked along the top of it." Then I prayed, "Hear us, our God, for we are being mocked. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders." At last the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. This gentleman here, Sanballat, was here. He is a governor of Samaria. He's an older gentleman. He had lived in this region a long time. He was a powerful man. And you notice one of his tactics, he doesn't like what's happening because there's a shift happening. He's a man of power, and he has controlled this environment, this community for a long time. He and some of the other governors were the ones in charge. And so he is losing some of his power and authority. They know that the king has sent Nehemiah, that he's not doing it on his own. And so what they're doing is they're actually revolting against the king, ultimately because they're losing power and control. And I find it interesting, his first tactic. What he does is he begins to get a coalition around him of people who think the same way. You'll notice this. If you ever have to deal with someone that has decided, you know what, I don't like this individual, and maybe they decide I'm going to war against them, I'm going to destroy their life, what they usually do is they get other people that have similar thinking, and they get a coalition around them because they're looking to tear down something, so they want teammates in this. And this is what he does. The other thing that's really interesting here, he's mocking their worship. Before, he's acting as if he's part of the team, but ultimately you see his heart come out because he's asking the question, do they really think that reinstituting sacrifices, just worshiping this way, is going to mean anything? And he attacks their worship. And really what he's asking and stating is, do they really think they can rebuild their lives? This group, this meaningless, worthless group of people that have been under my thumb, do they really think God is going to rescue them? Do they think they can rebuild? And he gets this coalition around him. Tobiah, the Ammonite here, he's the governor of his region. And he jumps right into this mocking of commenting about the work that they're doing, not just mocking their worship, not just mocking the people, but now they're pointing like look at what they're doing. It's pointless. The work won't last. Said if a fox jumped on it, it's going to destroy it. And they begin to attack the work. Church, I want you to see this, because if you are going through a season of rebuilding your life, or maybe you're experiencing this in other places, in other ways, and if you have opposition that comes against you, these tactics will pop up time and time again. To get a coalition of people that are against you and trying to tear you down. But the other thing that will happen is they will mock the work that you are doing and try and make it seem like it's meaningless or pointless for you to rebuild your life. This is what Nehemiah is dealing with. And I love Nehemiah's example here. His response is to pray. This is his first response. But I want you to notice the kind of prayer. This may kind of surprise you. He prays that they get to experience exile and being taken into captivity. That seems like a harsh prayer. God, I pray that you will overthrow them and that they will have to be slaves somewhere. That's a tough prayer. But we see this, even David says things, and this is a really challenging prayer, but he asked God to smash the teeth of his enemies. Wow. I didn't know we were allowed to pray that way. Well, now I have a new way to pray. I'm going to write this down. But there is a principle here. See, what Nehemiah is praying against and what he's experiencing here is anger, but it's a righteous anger. There's a difference between someone cuts you off and you pray that they crash their car. That's more about an issue with you and your heart. But if we see someone, like for instance, in this room, I'm pretty sure with a room full of believers, if we saw or witnessed or was seeing and knew that someone had abused children, wouldn't this cause us to anger? And this is a righteous anger, because we know it's a violation of God's principles and laws. And so when we begin to get angry or frustrated or upset with the things that God gets angry or frustrated or upset with, this is a righteous anger versus a selfish anger, which is, I'm just mad because I don't like them. And so here Nehemiah, he is doing what the Lord has granted him to do. And he's revealing this righteous indignation and anger towards what's happening. And what a powerful example this is. This is him persisting through ridicule. The second point here this morning is prepare and prayerfulness. And let's look at verses 7 through 14. But it says, but when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs, Ammonites, and Ashdodites heard that the work was going ahead and that the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem were being repaired, they were furious. They all made plans to come out and fight against Jerusalem and throw us into confusion. But we prayed to our God and guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. Then the people of Judah began to complain. The workers are getting tired and there is so much rubble to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall by ourselves. Meanwhile, our enemies are saying before they know what's happening, we will swoop down on them and kill them and end their work. The Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack us. So I placed armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall in the exposed areas. I stationed the people to stand guard by families armed with swords, spears, and bows. Then as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. There's these hindrances to the plan and the dreams that God has given Nehemiah. The first challenge that he experiences are from enemies from the outside. It's people around him that are attacking or are not only saying, mocking him, mocking their faith, but they're threatening to attack them. Their ultimate goal is to stop them from doing this work. And Nehemiah's response to this challenge is to pray. He prays first, but then he acts to protect the dream. He doesn't live naively, he prepares people. He stations people in appropriate places, and he arms them and prepares them, and he challenges them. And he challenges them to remember why they're fighting. To fight for this dream, to fight for their families, to fight for God and be prepared. And that ultimately, if they do this and they're prepared and their hearts are right, God will do the fighting for them. The second challenge they encounter is from the inside. People became tired. Just like my nephew building the sandcastle, wave after wave came, and he became discouraged. And so he just sat down and cried. How many of us maybe have these moments just like that? I don't know if you've ever experienced this where you're growing in an area and you feel like, man, I've just conquered this, or I'm making headway in this area, and then something else collapses in your life. And you're left sitting there saying, really, Lord? I was being obedient and taking these 3 steps forward, and then this collapses over here, and the temptation is to sit and cry. And so this is the challenge that they're facing because they're discouraged. There is so much work to be done, and they're tired. They're only halfway done, and they're getting discouraged. Ultimately, they felt alone. There's an interesting third challenge this group of people faced, and that was people bringing bad news of what they heard. These are people that they stated are Jews. So they identify as being part of the team. We're part of the community. They're not living in Jerusalem. They're kind of on the outskirts. But they come in and they say, hey, this is what we're hearing. We're not in here helping you with the work, but I'm going to tell you all the bad stuff that I'm hearing, and you guys better be careful because they're going to come kill you. And it says that they came in day after day after day. They're saying the same thing over and over again. I can imagine this people here are probably a little frustrated. It's like, yeah, that's great. Why don't you pick up something and help us then? Don't just come tell us, come help us. And so this third challenge comes from people that have said, hey, we're on your team, but we're not really here helping. And the response that ultimately Nehemiah has is he tells the people to arm themselves, to defend themselves from any attack, and to be prepared. So this was a moment to refocus. They were halfway there. They were experiencing difficulty, experiencing challenges, and the work was not done yet. And the people became discouraged. The truth is, when you begin to attack areas in your life that you need to grow in, you will get discouraged. There'll be moments where you feel like giving up. There'll be moments where you experience opposition. There'll be moments when maybe even internally your own family and friends will oppose. And there are moments where people may be critical of you. And I want to encourage you and challenge you that this is a time to refocus on the Lord and to move forward with what God has called you to do. That sometimes when we experience these hurdles and these walls in our life, it's not to see if we can go around the wall, but to see whether with God we will go through it. And will you trust God in the midst of it? And as you remember the dreams that God has given you, just like Israel had to do, they had to remember who they were fighting for. So what is it that God has called you to do, and why? And instead of focusing on the obstacles of your life, look to those things and say, God, what have you called me to? What have you given me as a purpose in my life? Why do I need to do these things? Because it will motivate you through these challenges. The third point here this morning is to persevere with readiness. So we're going to look at verses 15 through 23 here. It says, when our enemies heard that we knew of their plans and that God had frustrated them, we all returned to our work on the wall. But from then on, only half of my men worked, while the other half stood guard with spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. The leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah who were building the wall. The laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. All the builders had a sword belted to their side. The trumpeter stayed with me to sound the alarm. Then I explained to the nobles and officials and all the people, the work is very spread out and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. When you hear the blast of the trumpet, rush to wherever it is sounding, then our God will fight for us. We worked early and late from sunrise to sunset, and half the men were always on guard. I also told everyone living outside the walls to stay in Jerusalem. That way, they and their servants could help with guard duty at night and work during the day. During this time, none of us, not I, nor my relatives, nor my servants, nor the guards who were with me, ever took off our clothes. We carried our weapons with us at all times, even when we went for water. There's a principle here that's worth remembering that Nehemiah does in an area of leadership. One of the things that we should do is you bring the enemy's schemes to the light. So when there's opposition, when there's people coming against you, when there's these moments happening, shine a spotlight on them. There's this thing that happens that when sin and evil and ugly moments are exposed, it shows truth. And ultimately what it leads to is it inspired people to get back to work because the motivations of those who were opposing were exposed and they saw the goodness of God and it motivated them to get back to work. But they prepared. They saw the behavior of those that came against them, and so they prepared for it. And ultimately, this dream that Nehemiah is moving forward with is too big to do it alone. Nehemiah can't do it alone. He recognized that they needed each other as a community. Just like for us, we need each other. You can't do this thing of faith alone and by yourself. You must be in community because I can promise you this, life gets hard sometimes and you need people to walk through it with. And this is what's happening for Israel. And ultimately, they need God more than anything. I love this moment that Nehemiah has as well. Because the people who live in Jerusalem, they're clearly on the team. Those who are in other communities are on a different team, and they're fighting against Israel. But the ones on the outskirts, they keep bringing bad reports but not helping. Nehemiah makes them choose and make a decision. You're either on the team, you're with us, or you're against us. There is no such thing as a middle ground any longer. You either move into the city and you join what we're doing, or you join out there with them. But there is no middle ground anymore. You're either moving forward with us, or you have no part of us. And what a challenge that is, to choose this day, as Moses said, whom you will serve. Moses stood before the people and gave that same challenge. Are you going to serve the gods of this world, or are you going to serve the one true God? This is the same question for you and I. Today, this day, whom will you serve? Will you pursue what God has called you to, or will you live for yourself? There is no middle ground. I want to give some closing challenges here this morning. I want to call us and encourage us to really reflect on Nehemiah and his persistence as this great example of faith in action. And I know here this morning that there are people here that are maybe in different stages of figuring all of these things out. If you are here today and maybe you don't know if you believe in this Jesus stuff and you're just exploring and trying to figure these things out, I think that's great and welcome. Maybe you're here and you're young in your faith. You're a new believer. And maybe you're a disciple that's been living for Jesus for a long time. Nehemiah has an example that all of us can follow in this. And really the question for us to ask is, how can I persist in building the walls of faith and in my life and in others? If you are here and maybe you don't know Jesus, one of the things that I've noticed, which is interesting, I've talked to plenty of young people in these places that have told me they're an atheist or they're an agnostic. And I'll ask the question, okay, well, do you think it's important to answer the biggest questions of life? And without fail, they all say yes. And then I ask, so what are you doing to find the answers? And they tell me nothing. That's typically what happens. So in reality, they don't want the answers. They just don't want to live and serve a God. That's usually what happens. But I want to encourage you with this. Maybe you're in that place. I want to encourage you to take a step of faith, so to speak, and start asking questions and go talk to people. You can come talk to me. You can talk to our elders. I know Rod, he's always up here up front. He would be happy to talk to you. So many of us will be glad to answer questions, hard questions, easy questions. We don't care. We are willing to dive in and have discussions about faith and why we believe what we believe. But I want to encourage you to start seeking answers to those questions. And if you're a new believer, maybe you're brand new in the faith, will you persevere and actually build your foundation on your faith in Jesus Christ? This means that you begin to take small steps towards following Him and growing in your faith. It could be something small like, hey, I've never really read my Bible, but this year I'm going to start reading it a little bit at a time. Or maybe it's you want to join us. We have a discussion group, Table Talk, on Wednesday nights. This place is a great place. If you have questions, you can show up. You don't even have to be a Christian. You can show up. We'd be glad to have discussion with you. And even though we have a plan of what we're going to talk about, if you derail it, that's awesome. We love it. And so maybe show up to that. It's Wednesdays at 6. We meet in the basement in the fellowship hall. Come join us. Everyone is welcome. Have discussions. It's a wonderful place to work through these questions together. And maybe you've been a disciple for a long time, and you're needing to take the step of faith where you are going to invest in the lives of other people. Will you begin to make disciples? Will you live out your faith where you invest in other people? That doesn't mean you have to be an upfront speaker. It doesn't mean you have to teach a Sunday school class. It could be as simple as going to coffee with someone. It could be as simple as serving and inviting someone else to come serve beside you. Can be as simple as these kinds of actions, but will you take that step to disciple others? And there are three things that all three groups need to do in this. And number one is take personal responsibility. What is your role? Nehemiah and the people of Israel took personal responsibility in their planning and preparation. We as followers of Jesus have a call to take responsibility for our place where we're at and our steps of growth that we need. Are you willing to take responsibility? The second one is to pray specifically. Will you ask the Lord to reveal in your life and in your heart what your next step needs to be? What areas and places where you can take these steps of growth? And then the third and final one is to act intentionally. That's whether you're joining a group, coming down to table talk, maybe reaching out to someone, volunteering to serve in a ministry. I want to challenge each person here, regardless of what stage of faith that you are in today, that you take one tangible step this week to grow in that faith. If you're asking questions, genuinely start seeking and searching. If you are a new believer, get connected, come to life group, come to table talk. If you're a longtime believer, find someone that you can invest in, find a ministry that you can serve in. Do something to help you live out your faith this week. Let's pray together.